Imagine being one of the main protagonists of a show, having your character built and fleshed out as a leader and almost something of a center point of your group. You somehow interconnect all these characters around you for several seasons. Imagine having to go through confusing changes and lost identity while navigating a larger-than-life entity threatening you and your loved ones. Imagine your character leading the charge in an effort to contribute and protect your town, going through endless trauma alongside your found family, only to push past it because there are bigger things to worry about, like coming face to face with the creature that has plagued your childhood. Imagine your character being forced to grow up too soon, too painfully, to go through the culmination of years of trauma, only for your character in the last stages of your growth to be called nothing but a Tammy freaking Thompson. If that didn't make you slightly mad, then I don't know what will. Anyways, in this video, I'm going to be discussing the abomination that is Mike Wheeler's character now that Stranger Things is over. And like I said in my last video discussing Will's coming out scene, reducing Mike to Tammy Thompson is a disservice to Mike and his intelligence, and that is exactly what they did by removing Mike from playing any pivotal role in Will's arc, which has now reduced him to nothing but a flimsy love interest for, dare I say, both Will and Eleven, and I find it extremely disappointing. There is no payoff for either Mike's relationship with Al or Mike's relationship with Will. We get no mention of the painting or no proper acknowledgement of Will's feelings besides Mike admitting that he was so caught up in his own shit he couldn't be there for Will, and after that we get nothing, absolutely nothing, but the massacre of my boy. We are simply left with unanswered questions for questionable behavioral patterns in regards to Mike's character. And if I'm being honest, a part of me doesn't want to believe that this is what we get for Mike as a character, but another part of me thinks, of course this is what happens when you put your faith in the hands of two people who clearly do not care about the source material of their show anymore, given everything that has happened in the past few weeks, because my goodness, was it a lot, but I digress. In this video, I will be discussing the progression of Mike's character and his emotional depth and leadership in Season 1 and 2, the deliberate changes of Mike's character and personality in Season 3 and 4, and the poor handling and mischaracterization of Mike Wheeler now that the show is over in Season 5. The progression of Mike's character, his emotional depth and leadership in Season 1 and 2. Looking back at Season 1 and 2, I think you can see why Will calls Mike the heart of the party, besides the obvious of Will being in love with Mike. Mike really was the heart of the group. We see it in the little things like Mike telling Dustin you can have more than one best friend, Mike believing in Will still being alive, and Mike taking care of Al and keeping her safe even though it caused tension between him and Lucas, and how they searched for Will separately. Mike still obeyed party rules and fixed things with him, but with the help of Dustin, of course. All in all, Mike was actually a pretty good kid despite being a little shit at times. It was Mike's relentless, and I mean relentless and outspoken care for his party that kept these boys together, not to mention Mike being the greatest defender of Will when everyone thought he was dead. In essence, he was always Mike the Brave. I don't think it's far-fetched to say that Mike was arguably the main character of Season 1 alongside Joyce, Hopper, and Jonathan. He was rallying the boys together to look for Will, and I find it a bit ridiculous that Mike, at 12 years old, showed more emotional depth and character development than he ever will come close to now knowing what happens to him in Season 5. It's almost a night and day comparison because little Mike Wheeler fought with his family over their inaction in Will's disappearance. Little Mike Wheeler stood up to Will's bullies. Little Mike Wheeler was smart enough to hide Al in his basement for days and was smart enough to figure out Will was possessed. And even in those moments of showing his intelligence and heart, he was still written to also have extremely complex emotional arcs in Season 1 and 2. I will never forget how he threw himself off the cliff above the lake Will's dead body was discovered in. Even though he was pressured in that situation to save Dustin, You just can't deny the fact that him consciously choosing to walk off that cliff without an ounce of hesitation was a reaction to all the stress he had been going through looking for Will, and most probably having a tiny part of himself believe that maybe Will was actually dead and that was him in the lake. The meltdown Mike has in the buyer's house when he finds out that Hopper had been hiding Al all along was so painful because he thought he lost her and he was probably reliving the trauma of losing someone all over again right before his eyes. They had no issue showing the emotional complexity he was experiencing in season 1 and 2. We had the foundations of Mike growing into a sensible leader, in addition to the very clear trauma he experiences, showcases, and carries from season 1 into season 2, especially with how he acted and reacted in school because of it. Mike was always a very emotionally heavy character until season 3 and 4, where things suddenly changed. Or was it sudden? The deliberate change of Mike's character and personality in seasons 3 and 4. We see Mike's character drastically pivot in season 3 and 4, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm not ready to fully acknowledge that Mike was just an ass to Will and Eleven in these seasons for nothing, so we're just going to push that aside for now and focus on the subtext on why Mike's character changed so much. We stop seeing Mike as the leader in the beginning of season 3 and are instead shown a more immature and harsh version of him, which you could chalk up to hormones and puberty, but that wouldn't make much sense because Lucas and Dustin are also Mike's age and are also going through the exact same thing as him by both having girlfriends, and you just don't see them treating their girlfriends, or even Will for that matter, as badly as Mike suddenly does in season 3.
Lucas, stop.
Will thinks it's funny.
Because it is. Yeah, it's so funny that I want to spend romantic time with my girlfriend.
I'm spending romantic time with my girlfriend.
And that was a deliberate choice. I've touched on this before in my Mike analysis video, but I find it interesting that once Mike is actually in a relationship with Al, the show goes out of its way to show us it's terrible. He lies to her when honesty was always an option and spends the whole season dancing around trying to talk to her, while all it took was one fight with Will to make him bike across Hawkins to apologize to him for it. And one can honestly chalk it up to just boyish immaturity in how he can't talk to girls anymore, but he is mature enough to realize that he did make a mistake with how he treated Will and then makes an effort to correct it, which he still does not do when it comes to Al. And with that point, I also find it very telling that Mike's character arcs are always tied to Will's, because once Will is basically sidelined from the main plot of season 3, so is Mike. You purposely see these two specifically portrayed as going through unwanted and unhappy changes, navigating becoming teenagers, by one trying to reclaim his stolen childhood and the other forcing himself to grow up. And only once they discover the Mind Flayer's back does Mike sort of go back into his leader role, coming up with a plan to trap Billy, and by doing that focusing on the party again, especially after Will knocks some sense into him.
Really? Where's Dustin right now? See? You don't know and you don't even care, and obviously he doesn't either, and I don't blame him. You're destroying everything.
Season 3, in my opinion, deals a lot with Mike beginning to acknowledge and question his sexuality and recognizing how he treats Al and Will the same. I once again have covered this a lot in my Mike analysis video, so I won't repeat myself, but what we see in the ending of season 3 sets up the foundation of Mike's actions or inactions in season 4, especially with how he reacts to being told "I love you" by Al. When again, and this is purely my opinion, in the end of season 3, Mike was actually ready to accept their relationship as over and moving forward with Al as friends until she kisses him, which makes him extremely confused. Season 4 is where I believe Mike's character both deepens and also diminishes in complexity. Because I can guarantee you, everyone watching the show, especially in the California arc, were probably wondering, what the hell is wrong with Mike? He just wasn't himself. He wasn't that headstrong little boy we knew from season 1 and 2. Instead, we see him carrying new burdens without Will and Eleven. I know we always question how Mike suddenly got back into D&D after avoiding it for all of season 3 because he was forcing himself to grow up, but I think what helps him cope is turning to D&D again because of Will.
What if you want to join another party?
Not possible.
A part of me thinks he's playing D&D again in high school to somehow make it up to Will for hurting him in the last summer and watching him basically give up on something they built their relationship on since Will wanted to donate his D&D things. And it is also a way for him to keep his connection to his best friend alive since we know in season 4, Mike couldn't exactly reach Will as much to talk to him anymore. Season 4 goes out of its way to highlight that something is also going on with Mike mentally when it comes to his behavior. He is terrible to both Al and Will in this season, and honestly, it's because Mike doesn't know what he's doing. He comes to California dressed like a tourist with a preconceived notion that Will is painting something for someone he may like, but never directly mentions to Mike. He then finds out Al has been lying to him about her experiences in California. We are meant to see his attention split in wanting to be there for the people he cares about and also pushing those very people away because of how much they've lied to him. He treats Eleven and Will exactly the same, hurting their feelings then trying to mend them half-heartedly. Well, half-heartedly for Al, that is. In season 4, Mike's character is almost centered around Will, whether you like it or not. Otherwise, he would have been written to be in that lab with Al when she chooses to go with Owens. But because he couldn't be fully honest with her or himself, he never went. Byla aside, Mike's character development hinges on Will's suffering, which is why I say even though his internal struggles are complex, it also diminishes him by tying him to another character who's also going through an extremely difficult character arc, which is actually triggered by Mike's awful behavior. It's almost like a cycle, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What diminishes his character the most is that season 1 and 2 Mike would never do this. But also, season 1 and 2 Mike wasn't fully aware of the social responsibilities of maintaining good, healthy relationships that he even ruins with people like Dustin and Lucas. When he was younger, it was much easier for him to be a heart on his sleeves type of person, but once he starts to grow up and see changes around him, he doesn't know how to react. And the thing is, with Mike's family dynamic, I don't blame him. I'm not saying the Wheelers are a loveless family, far from it if we've learned anything from how Mike runs to his mum when he's hurt, but I am saying they lack a hefty amount of communication skills, and you see that portrayed by all of them. And if you throw all of these things into a pot and then sprinkle a sexual identity crisis on top of that, you start to understand why Mike couldn't even tell Al he loves her. And to be clear, he does love her. He just keeps mixing up love for idealization. Because Mike loves Al, the superhero, but Jane Ives/Hopper, the abused young girl who desperately needs to share the emotional burden of being made into a weapon against her will and then thrust into normality in another state while coping with the death of the only kind father figure she had, is something Mike simply cannot handle. And we do see him attempt to handle it, but failing miserably, causing more harm to Al than good. And in speaking of Mike handling things, the painting from what I've seen is almost always discussed from Will's perspective, but I think this is why the painting is so significant to Mike in the moment he receives it. He's basically spiraling at that point talking to Will, and I think it grounds him in a way. Looking past it being Will's disguised love confession to Mike, when he explains the painting to Mike, I think it reminds him of who he is. The heart, the glue that holds the party together because,
without heart, we'd all fall apart.
The significance of the painting also shows Mike that Will also never gave up on D&D and moved on without him. It also showed him that even though distance made them grow apart, Will actually still did care about him. Honestly, we give Mike a lot of shit for being a terrible boyfriend and friend, but he's also an extremely traumatized teenager who has experienced losing the two most important people in his life and doesn't know how to properly navigate and articulate himself because of it. And again, add his complex feelings for Will on top of his failed attempts to fix his relationship with Al to the mix, and this boy is lost. He's so lost. He doesn't want to lie to Al because he actually cares about her, but he also held on to his best friend's almost permission to push him to tell him he loves her because he just couldn't do it on his own. I believe Mike meant it when he said he couldn't lose Al again because he literally couldn't handle watching her die again. In retrospect, season 4 actually did do a lot to build Mike's character, which does pay off in volume 1 of season 5, where we see the painting's influence on Mike as he incorporates D&D into everything he does alongside the party. The poor handling and mischaracterization of Mike Wheeler in season 5. So now that I've laid the foundation of Mike's character arcs, internal struggles, and growth, I'm going to need you to do something very important for me in discussing Mike in volume 2 and 3 of season 5, okay? I'm going to need you to completely forget every single thing I just said because it actually doesn't freaking matter at all, thanks to the Duffers.
And you still think we can be friends?
Friends? No thanks. Best friends.
And now I'm actually going to discuss the character assassination of Mike Wheeler. Mike in volume 1 of season 5 had so much potential to me. He was planning the crawls alongside the party. He was the one deciphering codes from Robin and actively being the leader of his party again, orchestrating their part of the plan together to the point where it was second nature to him. And on top of that, his dynamic with the party finally grows. Mike actually had some sound advice when he was talking to Dustin about fighting two battles at once in grieving Eddie and what Dustin needed to focus his energy on. Mike actually takes Lucas's "I don't believe in coincidences" extremely seriously, which I'm hesitant to say is a deliberate callback to how Mike used to dismiss Lucas in season 1 because I don't trust the Duffer's writing abilities anymore, but nonetheless, we see it more. Most of all, we see Mike encourage Will to use his powers on his own as the sorcerer, believing in Will when Will didn't even believe in himself. He even goes a step further by helping and encouraging Holly by giving her her own D&D figurine, and also encouraging Al by constantly trying to remind her to look at things more positively, even if it's all through D&D explanations. I think by now we all know how special that moment was in The Sorcerer for us. Even if you don't ship Byler, you just knew that there was no way in hell Will would ever let anything bad happen to Mike. And that moment, that goddamn moment left the door open for so many more possibilities moving forward with volume 2 and 3. And it wasn't just for Mike's reaction to Will having powers, but I was waiting for Mike's character to change. Maybe explore him not being needed by Al because of her self-growth and now not being needed by Will because he reclaimed a part of himself in a way from his traumas. There was so much we could have gotten from Mike, like so much. But unfortunately, at the end of volume 1, that's all we get. That's where it ends. Mike's character is literally non-existent after episode 5 of season 5, and it doesn't make any goddamn sense. Like, where the hell did all the emotional heavy lifting go? Did it happen off screen? Was it left to our interpretation? Was it even in the room with us? Dustin went through so much dealing with the consequences of introducing Eddie to the Upside Down. And I think the memory of Lucas asking Max if she's willing to accept the risk of joining the party haunted him every day he visited her at the hospital. Will and Eleven had to grapple with their own personal connections to the Upside Down and what it cost their loved ones. But Mike, who's directly linked to Vecna in this season with him coming after his entire family, shows us nothing. Nancy is basically carrying all the emotional weight for both of them. Like, did they forget that he's a part of the family too? That his baby sister got taken away from him just like his best friend was? That his parents were mutilated by the monsters that have been tormenting him for half his life? And having them almost die in that hospital? We don't even see Mike and Nancy just hold each other and cry. Nancy had such a visceral reaction, and I wish they just gave us a scene where she just kept going on how guilty she felt, only for Mike to break down too and finally talk to her about how he's feeling, because they're actual siblings. I feel like the show completely forgets about that. A part of me thought they were saving it for the floodgates to open or the pipe gates to burst if we care about that anymore, but to show us that Mike was trying to be strong, for him to be brave, to show us that he was actually putting on a front, clinging onto his D&D analogies for dear life, because that was the last thing he had control over until one emotional beat where it sends Mike absolutely spiraling out of control and being reckless with his life for the sake of the party and emotionally spent with the amount of damage Vecna has caused his family. Because we've seen him do it before. Mike as a child had more internal struggles manifest in external ways compared to anything we get in the seasons after that, and I forgave that for a moment because I was expecting it to pay off, and absolutely nothing paid off. The consequences of there being no payoff. With there being no payoff, we can now acknowledge what this means for Mike as a character and his effect on the others around him. And with that, I am now ready to acknowledge that Mike was just an ass to Will and Eleven for the love of the game. We will now, with the revelation of Season 5, never know why Mike treated Will badly in all of Season 3. And from the moment he sees him at the airport in Season 4. We will never know why Mike couldn't just abandon his safety net of not telling Elle he loved her because he was scared of losing her, in order to comfort the very girl crying her eyes out in front of him, pleading with him to tell her she's not a monster and that he loves her, because that is what she needed from him in that moment. We will never know why Mike had such a visceral reaction to Will asking...
And us? We're friends. We're friends. Well, we used to be best friends.
Because all these emotional arcs I spent my time explaining in this video mean nothing. And it sucks. It really sucks. We get no answers for plot points that were set up in Season 4, such as the painting. Will's painting was essentially a Chekhov's gun that was never fired. Why put such heavy emphasis throughout Season 4 about Will's painting to Mike? Why set up the fact that Will lied to Mike while using the painting and make it go on as long as the entirety of Season 4, without actually telling him it was from him? Why even make it go on for so long for it not to even be acknowledged throughout Season 5? I thought in my silly little head that the painting may have gotten destroyed when the Demogorgon attacked the Wheeler house, and that it was going to make Mike feel extremely guilty and apologize to Al for it, only for Al to ask, "What painting?" I really want to know what it's going to feel like if you watch the entirety of Stranger Things from Season 1 to Season 5, and then see the complete shift in this narrative, and if people will question, so does Mike just not know anything about the painting? Because he clearly doesn't seem to know anything in Season 5. It doesn't even make an appearance. And in all honesty, it makes more sense for it to make an appearance in Season 5 because it ties all three of these characters together in a very important way. But because the Duffers chose to backpedal, they completely ruin Mike's character in doing so, because Mike makes no goddamn sense without being queer-coded. I'm sorry, I have to say it. Putting his emotional arcs aside in reacting to what has happened to him with the upside down and everything, Mike as a person makes no bloody sense when you remove the aspect of him being gay or bisexual, because it makes a hell of a lot more sense when he is. You can easily understand that this is a boy questioning his sexuality and what that means for him living in the 80s in a pro-Reagan household with an outwardly homophobic father, what it means to identify that you have the same feelings for your best friend as you do for your girlfriend, who you suddenly can't keep a relationship with, or even say that you love her for that matter. Or why you suddenly can acknowledge and tell your best friend it's not my fault you don't like girls. It makes way too much sense when you think of it as Mike projecting. And I swear I'm not even making this shit up. I know this information because the show gave it to me, all because the show taught me to look at the clues and the subtext and that everything is purposeful. And for the most part, it was. For the last 4 seasons, things felt like they were building up for Mike's complex character development, only for something to change last minute. This is what happens when you swap out one of the best characters in your show for a lousy self-insert. You lobotomize him. You unnecessarily traumatize him again with the worst fear of losing one of the people he loves again, and then fast forward 18 months later, leaving Mike to grapple with the guilt that he freaking built the bomb that killed Al and that he couldn't even tell her he loved her back in the end. It makes no goddamn sense. I think we can all agree Mike and Al's relationship was so ambiguous in Volume 1 that we all assumed they broke up and were good friends again because this was the healthiest we've ever seen them in a dynamic together, until they're suddenly pushed back together into a relationship and it suddenly feels foreign. Why couldn't he tell her he loved her if they were always written to be together? She literally threw away her life for the now stupid boy who couldn't even tell her he loved her back. I believe the people who suffered the most from Mike's poor writing were Mike himself, Al, and Will. Because you're telling me Mike at 12 years old was defending Will tooth and nail to suddenly never acknowledge that his best friend is gay when the entirety of Hawkins and their mothers freaking knew. I find it laughable. I find it so laughable. Mike was so smart, and that's just it. He was. Now he's stuck with an eternal guilt of making up stories, of everyone moving on besides him, of being tortured to leave his childhood on a bookshelf and just grow up, to become his father, someone so unconscious and oblivious to the things around him. As if Mike wasn't one of the characters constantly picking up on things that were happening. This is who Mike Wheeler grows up to be. Mike Wheeler, who has Will's painting hung on his wall, still believing it was a gift from Al, and the words he fell in love with were hers because he is too stupid to figure out that Al doesn't even know the first thing about D&D. We could have had a paladin, but instead we got a storyteller. Final thoughts and conclusions. This video was a lot to make because of how emotionally draining it was to see one of my favorite characters fall so far from grace. It is so indescribably disappointing because we know how good it could have been. Mike Wheeler had the potential to be one of the most complicated characters ever portrayed, and also one of the biggest signs of positive queer representation. But unfortunately, he is still stuck in that closet with his one-way sign following him everywhere, reminding him of what he could have been. And unfortunately, this was the story the Duffer Brothers chose to tell in handling their queer characters and their queer-coded characters, that sometimes we don't get our happily ever after, and sometimes we lobotomize one of our favorite characters. Anyways, rest in peace, Mike Wheeler. You're going to love Good Luck Babe by Chapel Roan in your 50s. And if you like this type of character analysis video where I look at their regression instead of progression, please let me know if you want to see me discuss anyone else in the show. And as always, please leave your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss things further. And thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.